Awesome. Andrew Bennett, welcome to the Grit Factor podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You are episode 2, having to follow Jamie No, clean up his mess.
Well, welcome to my world.
I teed you up perfectly for that one. No, he did a great job, but we're excited to have you on the podcast, hear some of your story, and talk a little bit more about one of our values, resilient leadership. And so, really grateful to have you here. So tell us a little bit about what's the origin story of Andrew Bennett? How did you get to this moment in time?
Oh, it's been a journey. I'll tell you that. I straight out of high school, I joined the military.
Okay.
And so through my journey, through education and all that stuff, I joined the military, deployed to Iraq, came back, started college, then deployed to Kuwait.
Wow.
Came back, resumed college, deployed to Afghanistan, came back, finished college.
So is that three
Yep.
tours?
Yes, sir, 3.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. But it's so obviously I had a pretty non-traditional path as it came to growing up and getting out into the real world. So I somewhere along that journey, I had dabbled in some insurance at one point, and I really liked it. I enjoyed it, and which caused me to pursue a minor in insurance. And during that, there was a solicitation for an internship with IGA, and I reached out to Jamie, and I was like, "Hey, I'm interested, but I'm not the typical." 22-year-old kid coming out of college,
Right.
with some flexibility.
Right.
I've got a life and a house that I got to pay for and all that stuff. So I'll need like a guaranteed job whenever I graduate. And at that point in time, he was like, "Well, I don't think that's going to be the case. So appreciate your honesty." Shook hands, went our separate ways, and I went on my job search. Then a couple months later, he calls me up. He's like, "Are you still in the market for a job?" I said, "Absolutely." And then I interviewed with him, a couple of the team, and
What year would that have been?
that was in 2015.
Because the company, I'm trying to think,
2014.
Yeah, I was about to say, it was a pretty young company
Yes,
at the point. Yeah,
Everybody says I'm employee number 2.
that's wild.
Yeah,
man.
it is. It's been.
We could do a whole episode on just what you've seen, the growth, all that stuff over the last however many years, man.
So I've been with Jamie for 9 out of the 10 years. He's been running the organization. So
Yeah.
The rest they say is history. And
Started as an intern then, or did you come on a little bit more elevated position?
I came on as our lowest entry level position, which is a processing role.
Mhm.
Again, I didn't know anything about insurance in the grand scheme of things. Didn't know anything at all about what an independent agency did or does. And so I took the role to become more familiar,
Mhm.
get my feet under me, learn,
Mhm.
grow, adapt, get kicked in the teeth.
Yeah.
And throughout that journey, I've sat in literally every seat on the ride, between the service side to sales to new business marketing to back into service and now into operations where I'm the COO.
Yeah, talk a little bit about your current role.
Yes,
what
sir.
you're doing. Yeah.
So I'm the guy that they say, yeah, ask Andrew,
Yeah.
right? When nobody else has the answer, they say, ask Andrew.
Yeah.
A lot of times I don't
do
have
hear
the
that a
answer
lot.
still, but it's, I make it up as I go, and we try to do the right thing in the grand scheme of things. So realistically, I'm in charge of the day-to-day operations of the agency, and as well as like budgeting, forecasting from a financial perspective, just business operations as a whole.
Mm-hmm. So is that kind of complementary to this? Because Jamie focused on his episode, he talked a lot about the sales side and all that kind of stuff, and that's obviously his baby. I mean, he's so great at that. And then the service side, it's almost like there's kind of two. Am I saying this right? Is there kind of like two not departments, but kind of two lanes of IG, two functions? Okay.
I would actually say there's probably more like 3.
Okay.
There's the sales aspect, there's the service aspect, and then there's the support aspect.
Got it.
So sales is obviously sales. It's pretty universal across any industry. Service is once we have the clients on board, taking care of their needs, making sure they get everything that they want and need. And then the support aspect is I call it the internal business support that every company has, and that's your accounting, um, your I hate just continue using the word operations,
Yeah.
but the day-to-day workings of the company, cash flow, um, supplying the admin function, HR, IT, all those things are kind of rolled up into that support function.
So this is a little curveball question, but because I wasn't aware of your military background and how extensive that was, and we're talking about resilient leadership today. I'm just curious, like, talk about Andrew pre-military and then Andrew post-military, and how has that shaped your view on even what you bring to the workplace down IGA as our COO?
Yeah, so there hasn't really been a pre-military. I joined when I was 17.
Yeah.
So I was literally a senior in high school when I decided to take that leap, and it's been a massive part of who I am until I retired early last year. So, but with that being said, resiliency is a big push that they've had in the military, especially over the last decade or so. And it's in that environment, you're always going to run into obstacles. You're always going to be faced with challenges, but at the end of the day, you have to persevere and you have to find the motivation and the reasons to keep going. And whether that's for the good of the mission, for the good of the people around you, for the good of yourself.
Right. Right.
It's hunting the good stuff, as they call it. You always got to find the upside.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine, especially with all that you've seen, all that you've done, 3 different tours, that would have to like shape a person and how they like show up in the world for the rest of their life, right? And it can't help but impact your leadership style. And I'm curious, even as an executive leader here at IGA, how would you describe your style, your management, your leadership? Because Jamie's kind of like he's loud, outgoing, full throttle, and obviously you hang with that. You guys have a great working relationship.
So I would say I'm the yin to his yang, right? I'm where he's very, very passionate and direct and motivated every single day in and out. I'm very level tempered. And so I try and keep that marathon pace instead of a sprint pace. And us working side by side brings a good dynamic throughout the company from the top to bottom. And an important function of my role is to ensure that level tempo is translated from my level all the way down,
right?
While still accomplishing the sprints that Jamie's very passionate about.
Yeah, well, it's working and it's great because I love. I mean, Jamie is so complimentary of you behind your back. I mean, he's just like, man, Andrew's, and he loves to brag about how far you've come in the company, because I do think it's important to him and you as well now when new employees join the company. It's important for you guys as leaders for them to have a path, for them to see like, hey, look where Andrew's come and he's worked hard. Now it's you've done your part too, right? It's not just, for everybody, but when you get in and it's a good fit and you work hard, that there is a growth path here. Talk a little bit about that experience for you and just what you've seen over the years to getting to where you are today and how that growth path has impacted your life.
Absolutely. And the biggest key there is continual growth. And it's not just growth through experience, but it's pushing yourself to expand your knowledge base, even if you feel like you're not going to need it, or it doesn't really pertain to you that day. Acquiring skill sets, expanding skill sets that you're maybe not using, it's always going to continue to help further your growth and open up those doors to other opportunities.
Yeah.
to that point, I started and I've finished my master's since I've been with Jamie. And I'll tell you, there were a handful of times when, I'm ready to go out of the door at 5 and I said, hey, I gotta get out of here like right now, because I gotta go catch my 6:30 class
Right.
at MTSU. And he's like, why are you even doing that?
Yeah,
and I was
yeah.
like, it's a goal that I've set that I
Yeah.
wanted to get. And
He's like, you don't need it for me. And you're
Yeah.
like, yeah, but I want, yeah.
yeah, I want it for me.
Yeah. I love that.
And fortunately for Jamie, like the skill set that I got by going through all of that,
Sure.
directly ties into everything that I do day to day now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Well, let's dive into this topic of resilience and why it's a core value of ours, why it's part of the grit mantra that we have around here. What does resilience mean to you, and how has that shaped your career?
Resiliency, at the end of the day, it's the ability to see the light at the end of the tunnel, know that even if it's dark and hard and difficult today, that everything's going to be fine.
Yep.
Because every challenge you face, it feels like the end of the world.
Right.
But it never is. You wake up the next day, you figure out what's wrong with it, where you went wrong, how you went wrong, and then you keep going.
Yeah.
And so the ability to get up, dust yourself off, and stay committed to the mission and keep moving forward.
Yeah. And I've heard you talk about just like the ability to bounce back. What does that mean to you? Like practically speaking, in this lane of work, why do you preach that message? Hey, resilience is, you got to be able to bounce back.
As I mentioned, I started on the ground floor.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know anything. And through a lot of the experience in a growing company, I didn't have the resources or the people to just rely on to answer everything for me.
Right.
So with that, I've made a ton of mistakes. I've failed a lot.
That'll be it. We'll do an episode on that. All of Andrew's mistakes.
We could probably do a whole different podcast on that. But I failed a lot. I call it getting kicked in the teeth. Because obviously when you mess up, somebody's upset. Somewhere, some way, whether it's a client, whether it's a coworker, whether it's your boss, whoever it is,
right.
Somebody's upset. If you're not able to quote unquote bounce back and be resilient, you're going to dwell on it. You're going to focus on that mistake and either be gun shy on the next decision you have to make, or you're going to decide, you know what, I'm going to change my approach. I'm going to go into a different business that's fail proof.
Right.
But then you lose a lot of opportunity.
And it seems like you guys lead this as a fail forward type of, and not, it's not like we encourage mistakes type thing, but from what I've gathered in some of these conversations, it just feels like this is a safe place to not have all the answers, to be able to ask, to say, hey, I got a question on this. And everyone seems very happy to kind of collaborate and show each other. It's almost like the ones that isolate and don't ask, it's like, we'd rather you ask or make a mistake while, checking in than to go it alone and then make a mistake and we can't help you. And I mean, unpack that as a part of our culture.
Yeah. So we give people permission to fail. And the ability and the confidence that when they do fail, it's not punished. We know that in a high tempo, high octane organization, the people move fast. And when you move fast, you take some risks. When you're taking risks, you're going to make mistakes. We accept and appreciate those mistakes, assuming people learn from them, right? If they're continually doing the same thing, you're not learning from your mistakes. That's a little bit different, but we allow people to fail through trying.
Yeah.
It's the lack of caring or a lack of effort kind of failure that we don't accept and don't tolerate.
Yeah, and I've noticed that kind of humility from the top down with you and Jamie and the others that are on the leadership team. that there is that like open-handedness. Like we don't always have all the answers either. So we're not going to set ourselves up on this pedestal. And I think it permissions everyone else to kind of like take an exhale, breathe deep, and just settle into their leadership role here. And what really I think drives success on the individual level for a lot of these people. I'm curious, I put you on the spot here, but any specific challenge that you face when it comes to resilient leadership? How did you navigate through that? You mentioned like a lot of failure through the years, not to harp on that, but I think it's helpful for some of us to hear like what are some of the specific challenges and how did you bounce back in that?
So my entire career, like I said, I mean, that's really been a challenge day in and day out. But I mean, specifically, I can think of probably the most recent time I sent out a bad email.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't adapt my communication style to the way people would receive it.
Right.
And it was very A to B. I didn't really think about the consequences of how people would interpret it internally and the turmoil that would cause and whatnot. And obviously it caused some issues. And so what IGA did for me, and how Jamie supported my failure. I mean, we've sought out resources to help me coach and navigate through those in the future. Right. Is thinking about how I should have said it, how the words that I say matter. Right. Just those basic communication skills, to help refine it as they're coming from a leader of the organization.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and the reason why I asked is that speaks to resilient leadership. I mean, it's like you can't bounce back. You can't be resilient if you don't hit obstacles and challenges and different things and grow through them. I'm curious about the habits and mindset, even the shifts that you've had to maintain resilience over the long term, right? You've been doing this a fair amount of years now, like employee number 2 all the way to COO. So I'm sure there's been some mindset shifts or habits you've had to employ to kind of elevate yourself through the years.
Yeah, and it's really an extension of those core concepts and foundational items that I've learned from the military, and the quote unquote hunt the good stuff. It's finding the upside in most things. And
yeah, I'd love to hear more about. You said that earlier, and I'm just like, what is that? When you say hunt the good stuff, what do they mean when they're saying that?
Yeah, so it's taking any situation that you're in. And typically when we're talking about resiliency, we're talking about the bad situations, right? You don't have to be resilient in good times. But on in the bad situations, the problems that arise and all that stuff, you gotta hunt the good stuff. And whether that's hunt the good stuff within that situation, whether it's okay, I'll learn to do it this way, or just at the end of the day, I learned what not to do, right? Or it's the whole world seems like it's crashing down right now, but what keeps me going? Oh, it's my family. It's my daughter.
That perspective.
Those kinds of things. So that's really what hunting the good stuff is. It's finding the good stuff, not only within a situation, but within your life that makes everything worth it.
Yeah, I love that. Something I've heard you talk about before too is just around this idea of kind of just vulnerability, just allowing yourself to kind of be open and honest. And how does that impact your leadership when it comes to being resilient? Just allowing yourself to be open-handed with stuff.
In order to have an effective team, you got to be able to communicate. And coming from somebody who just had to go through communications class, you have to be able to talk to your team not only about the good stuff but the bad stuff. And it's not always dictation. Sometimes you're not at 100%.
Right.
I think there's a lot of stigma in today's society about not being 100% of the time. And the reality is nobody is.
Right.
And so it's just being honest with yourself, honest with your team, and open with them, saying, hey guys, I need to take a play off. I can go to the sidelines. I need to get a drink of water, take some breath,
regroup a little bit,
regroup, but getting back in the game. And that way your team knows what kind of headspace you're in. They know whether or not to maybe hold on to something that they might have just tossed in your lap.
Yeah, right.
That you weren't, mentally prepared to handle that day.
Right.
But
Well, and it takes that self-awareness too, right? Of like knowing like, hey, I need a beat. I need a pause. I need to take a breath. I need to go for a walk. I need to, and that's okay. Like it's okay to call a timeout, and that's not weakness. That's actually showing resiliency when you're like, hey, let me gather myself here before I, fire off this email or I lose it in a meeting or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
It's like because we are moving fast here. There's a lot of movement, but to know like even in this pace, you can call a timeout for yourself when you need to care for what's going on in you, right?
Yeah, and the other aspect of resiliency and leadership is not just about you either. It's identifying your team and doing those checks on them and being in their personal life, professional life, saying, hey, everything good? And they're like, oh, yep, got all my work done. I'm like, well, are you good?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Not just are you good with the work that you've been given, but are you good from a personal aspect? And sometimes when you ask that question and you go a little bit deeper than the surface, you get answers that you're not expecting. You're like, oh wow,
right.
I gotta take a step back and be like,
Yeah.
oh okay,
be ready for what might come after that.
Well,
Yeah.
Well, and it's not only that, but understand, okay, they're gonna have some limitations right now until they get over or through the whatever they're going through, and so then you can adapt not only workload, but your conversations, your communication style, your just your everyday interactions around that person.
Yeah, so. And I mean, IGA allows people to be human, right? Because that's just we're gonna have seasons of life where we're gonna be human. There's gonna be brokenness. There's gonna be different things we're going through, and a lot of organizations don't really allow for that. They're just like, hey, we just need you to show up and perform, and it's almost like be robotic. What I've noticed here is that there's a high emphasis on performance. It's a high performing organization, and what's also true is you can be a human here. You can kind of come with your stuff and your junk and whatever else, and there's in an appropriate way, professional way, there's going to be space for some of that. Is that true? I mean, am I out of line by saying that?
No, it's 100% accurate, and it has to be for any fast paced place. People have to be okay being okay, and so I would like to say we take pride in making sure our people are okay, and not just taking surface level comments of I'm good.
Yeah, right. Well, to that point, there's something that you and Jamie say all the time. You guys say we'll never go hungry.
Yeah. So I'm sure you've heard the phrase. What's the best way to eat an elephant one bite at a time?
Right,
and so in life or even IGA, that's the elephant, and your problems, your issues to solve. That those are your bites, and so. With that, as long as we're taking care of those bites, we're never going to go hungry.
I love that. Talk to the person who might be listening or watching this podcast who's looking at coming on board here at IGA and exploring a career here, specifically in the operations service side of things. We talked a little bit about sales stuff with Jamie. We've got some great guests coming on, and they're kind of all over the different parts of the organization, because we do have some really fantastic leaders here that we want to hear their story. But speak to that person specifically kind of in your purview of leadership. What would you tell them about IGA as far as what does it take to thrive here?
I would say that it takes a high level of commitment. But I would also say that it takes a high level of trust. And that's within yourself and within the organization. If you know you're a determined person, if you know that you're committed, you know that you're driven, I think that that's the foundational requirements to make it here. But I would also say that you have to trust the other people around you, because it's really easy to hold everything work wise, feelings wise, whatever. But at the end of the day, you can only do and hold so much.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to trust those around you to either do their portion of it, or not necessarily judge
Mm-hmm.
or have a stigma about how you're feeling.
Right. Right.
And so it's, and I understand the trust isn't something that's day one for most people,
Sure.
but as you continue to grow and adapt,
Mm-hmm.
that's really the biggest driver of that.
I love that. Just kind of final thought on resilient leadership for those listening, watching. Again, just either a current employee of IGA or someone looking to come on board. What encouragement, what advice do you have professionally, but also just personally, on how resilient leadership has played a role in your life and how it might impact their life if it's a skill that they're willing to acquire?
Resiliency isn't just beneficial in the workplace. That's where I would say start. It's not just going to help you manage a workload or overcome the screw up that you made on this one particular task.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to affect everything from A to Z. And what I mean by that is when you're going through struggles at home, if you're hunting the good stuff, if you're eating the elephant,
Mm-hmm.
and you're focusing on the next step, that's how you're going to get through it. And actually, I just texted Jamie this yesterday or the day before, and I said, we're just talking about how where we are today versus, last year versus, 9-10 years ago.
Right.
It's surreal. The transformations that we've made. But when you turn from looking behind you to looking forward, it's like, yeah, we've came a long way, but oh man, we still got to climb Mount Everest, right? We've still got a long way to go.
Yeah.
If you focus on your next step,
Mm-hmm.
and then your next step, instead of looking all the way at the top to
Right.
say, oh, I got this big journey ahead of me, it's not so daunting.
Sure. What excites you? Final question, because I just, when you said that about Mount Everest and where you're at just on our leadership team here, what excites you about the future of IGA? When you look down the road, what kind of gets you fired up?
So I'll back up to answer that. When I got hired here, I had actually already accepted a position somewhere else.
Okay.
Very, very comparable pay, benefits, everything from A to Z. So it was a flip of the coin, right? And it was either go to a very, very well-established company with, nothing to grow, nothing to build, or take a gamble
Mm-hmm.
and come to IGA, because again, it was a year-old company in an industry that I knew very little about. I didn't know if I was going to succeed or fail, but I decided to go with IGA, and it's because of opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
I knew coming in year one, if it was successful, I had nowhere to go but up. And what I say to everybody, whether I'm interviewing them or just talking about IGA in general, is your trajectory with IGA is only capped by the growth of the company as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
We don't even know what all seats are going to be available on the ride.
Mm-hmm.
But as we continue to grow, there's going to be more and more branches off of that tree that's going to continue to provide ample opportunity for every walk of life,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're in accounting or HR or marketing, for
Mm-hmm.
branding, if you will,
Sure.
to IT, to service, and the various kinds of branches out from that. I mean,
Yeah.
not knowing exactly what IGA will look like in 10 years is what excites me.
Yeah.
Because we think we know where we can go. We think we know what we can get to. We have a plan. We have a workable plan. But just not knowing where it's going to go, but knowing that it's going to go,
right,
is what excites me.
That's awesome, man. Well, listen, so glad you took that choice, took that risk all those years ago, and grateful for your leadership in the culture that you helped curate here in at IGA. And it is exciting, man. It's like you said, it's like we have a path, we have a strategy, but there's a lot of unknown too, and it makes it, especially for people that are wired like you and I, that's actually more exciting than the
it's always the journey, not the destination.
Yeah. Well said. Well, Andrew, thanks, man. Thanks for being on. This was fun.
Yep. Thank you.